John Rockman rolled up into the driveway of 217 East Cortlandt. There were already several patrol cars, detectives of course, and now he'd arrived to try and figure out how the crime had been committed. He'd been a crime scene investigator for just under 3 years. He thought it would get easier with time, but some days were still as jolting as his first day. His wife, Lindsay, would tell him that it was good to keep that side of him, that human side, the side that felt empathy. She said it was better than becoming a robot, oblivious to the damage that a murder caused. Ripples, she'd say. Ripples that run deep through the victim's family, friends, neighborhood, and community. To remember that every body he saw was loved by someone, was someone's child or sibling or even boss. She felt that keeping those thoughts in mind is what drove him to be a better investigator. He always wanted to be sure to solve the case, to at least add that much to the ripples. Skip Howard owned a small antique store amongst the hustle and bustle of the gentrified downtown square. Skip had taken over his pop's shop after getting out of the Navy. He'd been a SEAL, and his father had been sure to let everyone know. He'd been enormously proud of Skip, referred to him as "my son the hero, scored higher on the underwater knots than anyone ever had, best damn sailor, too." Skip always felt proud, knowing that his father had pride in him. By the time Skip had taken over the store from his pops, he'd had to step over the guy who lived 2 blocks over, but for whatever reason had decided to sleep in the doorway of the shop. He'd regularly swept away the cigarette butts off the sidewalk and removed the empty bottles of booze. Now, with the renovations, it was clean, freshly painted, and his next-door neighbor was a Martha Stewart store. Nothing like that XXX magazine store it had once been. He couldn't say that he was upset by the changes. In fact, he was proud of how the place looked, and it brought in a lot more customers now. People from all over the world. He'd even become known as the go-to guy for the hard-to-find items. Pieces of jewelry, missing pieces of someone's great-great-grandmother's wedding china set, a brooch seen in some fancy magazine. He was even mentioned in an article published in Cosmo after providing them with a silver locket and matching bangle bracelet for a shoot. The items were at least 150 years old. He'd remembered his father having them in the shop when he was just a boy. His father kept immaculate and incredibly accurate books on each item as they came in, their description, and who purchased them. Skip was a different kind of hero now. High praise from museums and art collectors. It wasn't the same as making his father proud, but he couldn't say that he hated that either. John walked up the front stairs of the shotgun-style duplex and into the living room of 26-year-old Goldie French. He looked around the room, eyes scanning over the furniture, the magazines on the table, artwork on the walls. One piece in particular struck him. A woman with graying hair, perfect complexion and posture, sky blue eyes, her delicate hand up by her neck. Next to it, an etched silver locket with an unusual square shape. Very beautiful woman. Even at this age, probably in her 70s, thought John, was probably a real heartbreaker when she was young. Everything was decorated with the eye of a professional. Artfully placed books, modern tables mixed with antique lamps. He noticed the embers still glowing in the fireplace. The smell of pennies so strong that John took out his tiny container of Vicks and rubbed a small amount under his nose. He took off his glasses and cleaned them with a shirt tail, looked towards the small but cozy dining room. There was a barnwood table, a bench on one side, 2 chairs on the other, a small crystal chandelier hanging down, sending a twinkling of rainbow colors throughout the front of the house, the sunlight dancing off each crystal piece. A classic hutch filled with china, looked like antique as well, soft pink roses connected by light green vines, gold trimmed, a small chip on a teacup. Marcus Adams walked into the room and stopped quickly upon seeing John. "Oh, shit! Didn't even know you were here, John. Good to see you." He walked towards John, held out his hand, and John took it, shaking his old buddy's hand. They'd grown up down the street from each other, attended the same schools from grade school through university. "Good to see you, too. How's the wife and kids?" Good. Kate just mentioned the other day that it was time for a double date, replied Marcus. Well, tell her to give Linz a call. I'll show up when given a time and a place. He chuckled, and Marcus agreed. Sounds good to me. John started again. What do we have here, Mark? He asked. Well, come on in and take a look. He motioned to John, but kept speaking. Goldie French. Yes, those Frenches. Dad's the CEO of Exco, and Mom is the ex-supermodel. So, she comes from money, but she doesn't particularly live like it. She's an art teacher and owns a very small studio. She also spends her Saturdays teaching art to inner-city kids. Anyone following up on that? Any customer that's been harassing her? An old boyfriend? One of the kids? Yeah, but so far there's nothing. Her mom says that she was well liked. Well, what about the money aspect? Could someone assume she kept money in the house? Is there anything missing? Her mother is upstairs looking through her things, trying to see if anything obvious sticks out, replied Mark. Then continued, in here. And he opened a door that led to the spare bedroom that had been converted to an art studio. There was open paint, spilled, and slowly dripping onto the floor. A broken lamp. Bloody handprints around the doorknob on the inside of the door. She must have hit him with the lamp and tried to make a run for it, John thought, making notes in his leather notebook. A gift from Lindsay. Goldie was twisted into an unnatural position, her hands tied to her feet tied to her neck, the rope having cut into the skin of her neck to about 1/8 of an inch, her eyes bloodshot, her mouth open, her tongue swollen. She looked grossly distorted. Her clothing wasn't torn or missing, John noted. In Skip's shop, the Forget-Me-Not. He changed the name when he'd taken over. His dad had named the shop Antiques on Broad Street, and Skip hadn't felt that it was catchy enough. His dad liked that he'd implemented the word knot into the name, spelled like the kind of knot one tied. Again, Skip had felt a sense of pride that his father had so liked the name. The phone rang. Forget-Me-Not, this is Skip, he answered. Yes, ma'am. Well, that's wonderful. I'm glad that you are pleased with it. Yes, absolutely, any time. I'll be looking forward to it. Have a great day. He was going to have an object featured on a model in the next Vanity Fair edition. A very specific order it had been, too. Some persnickety old photographer had seen a piece of jewelry once and was demanding that it either be found or replicated, but as hard as they tried, they couldn't get one that matched his expectations until finally someone had mentioned Skip and his remarkable ability to find and provide just the right item. And again, they'd been profoundly grateful, paid above and beyond the price he'd given them, and the photographer himself was the one who purchased it. Tippy French was sitting on her daughter's bed. The room was elegantly decorated in grays, white, and navy blue. Her large four-poster bed draped with a velvet navy cover. Her pillows were pops of white and gray. Nothing seemed to be disturbed. John took a step into the room, and Tippy didn't even notice. She was clutching a pair of plaid pajamas to her chest. Goldie's, John assumed. Mrs. French? Asked John, breaking the awkward silence. Tippy slowly looked up and simply looked at him as though her eyes were empty. Mrs. French, my name is John Rockman, ma'am. I am the crime scene investigator working on your daughter's case. Tippy continued to stare at him. Ma'am, do you understand me? He asked, because there had literally been no movement in Mrs. French's body. Yes, she responded, placing the pajamas on her lap. Who did this, Mr. Rockman? She asked him. I don't know yet, Mrs. French, but I will find out. Do you know of Goldie having any enemies? Enemies, replied Tippy. No, Goldie didn't have enemies, Mr. Rockman. Goldie only had friends she hadn't met yet. She was beloved by everyone. She was a friend to everyone. No enemies, sir. Her voice was curt, as would be a mother who was defending her daughter against perceived accusations of her daughter not being well liked. Ma'am, Did you notice anything missing? Not that I can say. There could be something, but I just can't remember everything right now. I understand, ma'am, responded John, but if you do think of anyone that could have done this or anything that is missing, would you please call me at this number? John handed her his card. Any time, day or night, anything at all. Tippy stood up, smoothed out her skirt, adjusted her feet and her heels. What is that under your nose, Mr. Rockman? She asked. She stood about an inch taller than John, blonde hair, blue eyes, barely a wrinkle in sight. Her makeup was perfect, even now, after seeing what she'd just seen. Not a single hair out of place. Thin, wide-set shoulders. An air of sophistication oozed from her every pore. Vicks, ma'am. The smell, she finished. The smell of my daughter's blood, she said curtly. You should smell it, Mr. Rockman. That is my daughter. That nauseating smell of her blood is what that bastard left us with, Mr. Rockman. You should feel as sick by it as I do, she said, as she walked past him, down the stairs, out the front door, and her driver drove her away. John, like a small child whose mother had just chastised him, wiped at his nose with his shirt sleeve. 6 weeks had passed by, and there had been no clues, not even a trace of a clue in the Goldie French case. Skip opened the shop on that Wednesday morning, a package underneath his arm, wrapped in a brown paper, and his hands were shaking with excitement. It was the new Vanity Fair, and he was in a hurry to open it up. He quickly flipped through the pages. No. Yes, there it is. He brought the magazine up close to his eyes to get a better look. Read the information at the bottom of the page. There. His name and the name of his shop. Lindsay Rockman was sitting on her lounge reading a magazine when John came home early. Hey, how was your day? She asked, folding half the magazine back, marking her place, and placing it on the coffee table. Fine. Slow. I can't catch a break in that French case, he said to Lindsay as she stood up, kissed him on his cheek, and said, You want a beer? Yes, please, he replied, sitting where Lindsay had been sitting. He glanced over at the magazine and almost missed it. The model wearing a square-edged silver locket. He grabbed his briefcase and rifled through the pictures of Goldie French's house, and there it was. In the painting, the exact same locket. Just then his phone rang. An unknown number. Yes, hello, Rockman here. He answered while ripping the page out of the magazine, reading the end. Name of model, clothes designer, and there, Skip Howard, Forget-Me-Not. Mr. Rockman, came the voice, vaguely familiar. Yes, he answered back, not really paying that much attention. This is Tippy French, Mr. Rockman. He snapped back into reality. Yes, ma'am. How can I help you? He asked. Lindsay, walking in with his beer, stood still, seeing that something was up. Mr. Rockman, I know what was missing. The locket my mother had given to Goldie, and there's a photo of it in Vanity Fair. Thank you for coming to my channel. I hope you enjoyed this story, and if you did, please give this video a thumbs up. If you are not already and you would like to be, please subscribe, and also click that bell so you can be notified when my content goes up and when we have a live podcast. Thank you. Good night.